All right. Just a tender reminder, we will not have any meetings for December 25th and January the 1st. Ziran, I saw you are on the line since you are from China, I believe, very late. John, do you mind if we let him go first? All right, I didn't hear anything from John. Ziran, can you take us through your document? Go ahead. We'll let you go first.
Okay, let me share my screen. Check out where is it? Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So, the general idea is here is we want to support more labels, typically from pod in method exchange, and the idea it come from our customer, and we were this was raised for a few times in our internal case system, and we have some customer wants to add some more labels. For example, they may have some label like the department in the pod, so and they want to put it into the metric, so everyone can understand the traffic goes from one pod to another better. So the general idea is we want to add a new configuration to the metadata exchange filter, and it's just like a whitelist, and allow you to support more labels, not just more labels in the exchange flow. And after that, you can use a telemetry API, just like I filled in the following, just like this, so that you can add a new tag in your metrics. So I think there's yeah, that's the general idea. I don't want to hear more feedback from the community, and yeah, that's all. Anything, any questions?
Thank you. I think it's relatively clear. So if I understood correctly, let's say I want, as a user, I want to add some of my workload information to metrics. First, I need to talk to the admin and ask the admin to change, based on your design, ask the admin to make a modification to the Istio operator YAML to add the additional labels I wanted to add, and then the admin need to redeploy the YAML to the cluster, and then I could potentially, or maybe the admin could potentially to, if this applies to more than one app, the admin could potentially to deploy the telemetry resource similarly as you presented to the cluster, which is a system-wide configuration because it's deployed to the Istio system, and then it would be impacted to all the workloads that happens to have. I guess it would just impact to all the workloads.
Yeah.
Is that how it works?
Yeah. If you for telemetry API, we have support more customer level, and I show a demo in the Istio in the root system for Istio, and without workload selector, so it will affect all the workload in the mesh. But if you in specific namespace, and maybe with workload select, so you can just impact for the specific pod or workload. So yeah, that depends on how you where you put the telemetry API.
Okay, does the application needs to make any change to work with this?
No, all of this is dynamic, and no restart was required.
I don't see any hands. Does anyone else wants to comment? Okay, Keith. Okay, you have microphone problem again.
And I want to share some context. I talked this with Quat and a long time ago, and we saw that we have a lot of hack point. We can use a lot of envoy filter to implement this way in HTTP, but for TCP, there's no existing matchings to implement this. So I think this is a common solution for both TCP and HTTP. I think there's a little problem is here. We add a new configuration and the built-in promises provider, but actually it will impact the metadata exchange filter, and also it will also work in tracing. If you really want to do it, I think it's possible to add something like the CEO expression in tracing.
All right, Keith, go ahead.
Sorry. So I think that this makes sense generally. My questions are more around the edge cases. So we do metadata exchange and propagation through headers in cases. We only have support for propagation. We only have support for headers for propagation, and sometimes you do metadata exchange, especially downstream via headers. So in those cases, I'm thinking about how we serialize this, right? Right now, the format, I think Quat removed flat buffers, but maybe not. But basically the format is sort of set. How can we, I'm trying to think about a way we can add headers to where, first of all, is there a way that the number of headers that we added, is it limited in some way? And we just now put everything that we possibly can into headers? Do we have to hit a header size limit in some cases? And also I'm thinking about the format itself. If headers don't come at the end, then will that throw off the serialization? Maybe not because you have data types, but just can you speak to some of the edge cases for how this could grow, and if someone adds 100 different labels that they want to put in metadata?
Yeah, that will be a big problem, and maybe some performance issue if you add too much headers here. And there will be a huge performance issue if you had a very large size headers. But yeah, it's a whitelist, and if you put something here, you need to understand the risk, and it's a whitelist, and if you really don't hit some bad performance, you just need to remove it. I think
that sounds good to me. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh. Yeah. Both of these things, if you didn't do anything, everything will just go through like the before, everything just like before, and you can just use this for building label, app, and the versions. And and if you really know your how they say, if you want to add something here, you need to know the risk. You need to understand it should be small as it can be. So I will write some hints when I during the implement to highlight the risk about the size and warning the user do not to add too much labels here, and do not add a label with a huge size of characters, and maybe highlight some risk of the format and about the data format also things, because would expect the here is just just something simple string. But I think, yeah, yeah, unless we highlighted, and then yeah, you own your system and you should know the risk. And after that, all is a whitelist. You can just, I think the risk is under control. Yeah, that's all.
So John had an interesting comment in the chat about this only works on sidecars, and how would we do to prevent user thinking this would work in ambient? If I assume you agree with that statement.
Yeah, I think there's a huge topic about around the data no support telemetry API. I don't think I didn't have no more context about it, but I think it was possible to support this in waypoint. And maybe that's all for now, because I don't think data no support every single feature is to support, and maybe just that will be a limit. And if we plan to support the whole telemetry API, like the metric custom, the custom side, in data, we should consider about it. But right now, I think that's fine to us. And if you really care about it, I think we can highlight this. We maybe yeah, this can start as an experimental feature and limited to sidecar model. But I think it's fine to add it to waypoint, but I need to verify it because I just poke it on sidecar and it worked as my expected. And yeah, today I just want to share the rough idea to the community and see if there's some objects or something I didn't think about. And if everything goes wrong, I will write a poke demo quickly and during the vacation, the Christmas and the New Year, because as you know, there was no holidays in China, so I can still working in this time.
All right, there's a lot of conversation in the chat. There are comments from Costin regarding OTel, and there are comments about how this work with Z-tunnel and Waypoint. Given we have a couple of other topics, should we take this offline and ask folks to comment on the doc, and also Jianping ask you to catch up with some of the conversation on the chat? And then move to the next topic, or is there anybody who wants to say something live here on the call before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think we can move to next call. I think John's, and we can keep our discussing offline through the document. And if you have on that, and you can just DM me on the Slack.
Okay, yeah, I would encourage you to look at some of the concerns and before you implement, because we would hate you to implement and then find out that some of the outstanding concerns are not resolved.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I think it's past midnight, so appreciate you presenting to us about the proposal today. John, I think you're up next about KRT.
Let me move that one to the bottom because it's the least important. So let's go, Ian.
All right, let's do that. Well, yours was on the first, now it's bottom. Sounds good to me. Ian, go ahead on the IP auto allocation.
Sure. So a couple versions ago, we released a new way to handle IP auto allocation. It persists the allocated IPs into the status field of the service entry. And by doing so, we eliminate all the churn that came from the version 1, which was ephemeral and had a lot of dependencies on ordering and could reallocate IPs differently if the ordering of service entries changed due to like a delete or adding a host name to an existing service entry or things like that. This is also pretty important for the ambient controllers. In 125, that is going to be turned on for ambient by default. And so the question is, do we want to go ahead and announce deprecation of the version 1 at the same time for 125, or just to collect feedback on that idea, I guess? Would anyone object to deprecating the version 1 allocation in 125?
Just to clarify, when we say deprecate, we just mean say that it's no longer recommended.
Communicate. Right? Yeah.
And removal would not be for a future point in time.
Yeah, removal would be like 127 maybe or beyond. But yeah, just basically say, this is no longer recommended. Please use this instead.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with that at all. That sounds good. We could probably say it's deprecated. Yeah, removed in future. Seems good to me.
By the way, you said right now it's a default. Is it just for ambient? What about sidecar? Is this feature not applicable to sidecar?
No, it works totally fine for sidecar. It's turned on by default in ambient. In sidecar, it's off by default, which is how the V1 worked.
But the deprecation and also the removal would apply to the sidecar users as well. Is that right?
Yeah. This basically, the V1 has no impact to ambient, really. The ambient controllers can't consume those ephemerally generated IPs because they come so late in the process, like during XDS creation.
Yeah, I don't think there's any concern for ambient. I was more thinking about, would this impact surprising our sidecar users with that? I guess that's why you're doing the deprecation announcement first before enable it by default for sidecar. Is that?
Yep, that would be the.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Keith, I think. Sorry, I talk over you. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're good. It was timing was off. Can we just quickly, for my sake, clarify what the user experience difference is from V1 versus V2?
What do you mean the user experience difference?
No, so if there is one, so like the auto allocation controller V1, is it just implementation detail change, and we're thinking that V2 is still working its stability ladder, or is there any difference from a UX perspective for a user who's using V1 auto allocation versus V2 auto allocation?
Okay, yeah. So V1 basically it uses like a consistent hashing to assign IPs at like essentially the last possible moment. So it's pretty well hidden from users.
Okay.
And this is made consistent by sort of sorting the service entries by creation time and then running the algorithm on them. And that's kind of okay. But if someone deletes a service entry, well, that changes that ordering, and that can cause.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I remember this. I remember a couple of issues related to this now. So this sounds just like a purely implementation change, right? The user just uses auto allocation, and depending on an environment variable, they get different behavior, or different assignment behavior, I should say.
Yep, that's pretty fair. The risk when you're changing from V1 to V2 seems to be about equivalent to just running V1, right?
Right.
You get all new IPs when you switch over. That can happen to you at any moment when you're running V1. Anyone changes a service entry and boom, you get that full reassign sometimes. So it seems pretty good.
Yeah. I'm all for deprecating V1, moving to V2. Clearly documenting the reasons why. I don't necessarily think we need a full blog post like I did for the operator, but I think that having some in the release or the upgrade notes saying hey, here's the situation that you can run into. You can test this today in a non-prod cluster, and help you just to understand what, like, the risks, because they might not understand the risk otherwise if they just have a super static cluster and it's fine. And then to, here's how you prepare for an upgrade, take these steps, etc. I'd be, I mean, we've got one or two releases to do that between deprecation and removal. So I'm good with that.
All right, appreciate it.
All right, sounds like people are okay with deprecation. Okay, go ahead, Peru.
Yeah. For clusters where both sidecar and ambient workloads are coexisting, so by the version when V1 is deprecated, it is recommended that sidecar workloads is moved to V2 auto allocation and then do the upgrades, right? That would be the recommended upgrade nodes. Is that correct? Is that understanding correct?
Are you referring to upgrade from sidecar to ambient, or are you referring to upgrade within sidecar, but you are moving from V1 auto allocation to V2?
Yes, the later one. Upgrading auto allocation from auto allocation V1 to V2 for sidecar workloads.
So that would be, so you would be, that's kind of what Keith was asking. So that upgrade is supposed to be switch the implementation for auto allocation for you under the cover as a user. So you're not supposed to need to change any of your YAML resources.
Okay.
So yeah, there's sort of two scenarios that I see. One, you can just, during a in place upgrade, you can just switch over, and that should basically carry the same risk as just running V1. If you are particularly sensitive and you don't want to risk that, if you're doing a revision upgrade, the new revision can spin up this controller and be operating under the new paradigm. And before any clients connect to the XDS server on it, it can assign all the IPs and they'll be stable when things start to connect to it. And that should be fine as well. Does that make sense? And for Keith's point, both of those probably need to be documented.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Did we decide when does it make sense to make it the default? I assume maybe after we launch the application and see if there's any feedback, and then the next release we can make it default. I saw Ben had some comment that we should make it the default in the same release as we deprecate.
So I think V1 is off by default, and for sidecar.
Okay.
So we probably just want to leave that.
I think the thing is right now we say it's off by default, but the sidecar documentation says to use V1, but mentions that there is a V2. So the most we should probably do for the docs is just flip that recommendation for the page that says, if you want to enable it, this is how you do it.
Oh, yeah. 100%. We should make it the default documented method when we deprecate V1.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
Change it so it's on by default. I think that's probably a no.
I'm only saying the former.
Okay, cool.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I got confused because there was a comment that says V2 is enabled by default for ambient in 125. So I didn't realize for sidecar we disable V1 also. All right, I think we're good on this topic. All right, thank you so much, Ian, for presenting this. John, up to you for the API discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to carry on the discussion we were having on the PR face-to-face, since there's like a bajillion comments. I thought it might help. I think we have most of the relevant parties here. So it seems like the main point of contention remaining, Costin, is the naming of service account field, not clarifying that it's a Kubernetes service account. Is that accurate? Are you still here? I think you said you're on 2 meetings, so actually maybe this is not a very productive.
Yeah.
All right, I think this mostly needs Costin, so let's put it at the end, and if he comes back, we can do it. If not, we can just take it up offline, and I will move on to my next one.
Okay, sounds good. I think all the concern come from cost, if I'm reading correctly. I don't know if. Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
All right, then I have kind of 2 topics in one. I've been looking a bit at the networks code, like the multi-network code. And I guess we'll go kind of backwards. So we have this concept called mesh networks. That was the original way that we controlled networks. And basically it's in the mesh config map, but it's a separate key, and you kind of say, here's all my networks, and here's how you reach them, here's the gateways and whatnot. Since then, we've kind of evolved from there, and none of the docs use this at all. Everything's using this new network label that you put on the namespace to kind of configure the common case of this cluster is like a network. So I was curious, like I don't have a strong need to like remove it or anything, but if I don't know if anyone uses this, my assumption is no, but I wanted to get some more feedback if maybe we want to start deprecating it or even more strongly stopping supporting it. If people are wondering where this is coming from, I can go on to the next topic, which maybe gives some more context on why. But that's basically, I don't have a strong need for it. The real reason is basically I've been looking at using KRT in more places. In one of them, I wanted to do the network controller code in Istio. The reason is because we actually use that in ambient, and we have the shim for picking up the changes from there into ambient. And the interesting thing I found was that in it's actually like it's fairly simple in some ways, but difficult in other ways, because it's quite easy to consume code that uses KRT from non-KRT code, because they just give you like an event handler and you can just watch for events and then list them out, which is how all the code already works in Istio today. But it's really challenging to go the other direction and consume non-KRT stuff within KRT. So in Istio, in the ambient stuff, for example, we read mesh config. And we did that by re-implementing how we read mesh config to be just natively supported in KRT. But when doing that, we implemented it in technically incorrect ways, in that we don't handle every single edge case and crazy combination of ways that you're allowed to read mesh config in Istio outside of ambient. And that was fine, or at least I think it was fine, and no one's complained, because ambient was brand new, and so supporting all the crazy legacy behavior was not a big deal. But as we start moving, or if we start moving more existing logic over, then we'll need to either consciously make that change and stop supporting models that we used to support, or instead of trying to adopt kind of like the low risk kind of leaf parts of the code to KRT, do the exact opposite approach and tackle like the core areas like mesh config, like mesh networks, and instead like work our way out, which is the opposite of what I had envisioned, which was like, go take the low risk areas that are like the ingress controller, for example, that has no dependencies. So I don't know, I've been talking for a while. I'm not sure if that made much sense, but that's kind of my thoughts on this. Any comments?
By the way, Costin is back. Costin, are you here? If we want to switch, when this finishes, if we want to switch to the other topic.
Yeah, I just bumped it to the end, Costin, because you were away for a minute. No problem, though. We can pick it up after. We have plenty of time, I think.
Just a question for me on the KRT stuff. What as far as those leaf areas that we have to decide whether or not to tackle, like how much work is it to just accept it? Because I want to be mindful of churn in those core parts of the code, like mesh config. Like how much effort is it to do the work to support those patterns in KRT? I think there was something you said about keeping access to the last state, for example, those sorts of things.
I don't know. It's not trivial, but it's probably not that hard. I haven't done it or tried it. Like there's a few things we need to add. For example, last known state. I think that's probably not a big deal. We support in mesh config like reading from files as well. So we'd have to add like a file-based collection or something similar. It's not so bad. Like it probably actually wouldn't be too hard to replicate the exact existing logic for how mesh config is read. What would be more work is going and taking the existing mesh config code and swapping it out, because that would probably, well, I guess not. I was thinking you'd have to change all the interfaces and mesh configs consumed by like a billion places in the code. But we could probably expose like a legacy interface shim and kind of the more modern shim, which is actually exactly what I did in this PR for the networks code. Where it was like, yeah, you can look up the network as you do today, or you can fetch the network, which is then like the KRT-ified and does a dependency tracking. So I guess it's probably not too hard. It's not so much about how hard it is to go write the code. It's more about, do we want to, go make these changes? Because it's one thing to say, sure, the ingress status controller that no one really cares too much about, and if it blows up, oh well, go rewrite that. It's another thing to say mesh config, which is the core of all of Istio, like we rewrite that. It's a very different decision to make.
Agreed. Yeah, I think minimizing the churn to that area, to the mesh config area of the code. It's not the churn, but just the chaos is more what I'm trying to say. Like, I mean, anything to minimize the potential chaos and risks that area of the code would be my vote. And I think the approach you described makes sense. If you take the PR that you did for mesh networks and just sort of maybe write an architecture, a short markdown doc on the approach, and split up the work across folks in the community who are interested. And it wouldn't be horrible, I don't think, and it would give us optionality to adopt KRT for new things, and then as time allows, port old things over, and you get dependencies from other place.
Yeah, makes sense. Costin, one thing we were asking before I think you rejoined was this kind of state of mesh networks today. You might have context. Like I'm just not sure if it's like this old thing that no one uses and is totally abandoned, or if it's something that everyone's using and they don't talk about it. I don't have many ways to find that info, but I thought maybe you'd have some clues.
I haven't seen anyone using it actually, but at least in for our customers, but it may still be useful because it's a way to configure networks. I mean, I don't think there is an equivalent in Kubernetes, but I don't mind if we just don't support it in Ambient, for example.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Of course, for Sidecar and Istio Classic, anything we delete, it's kind of drama and catastrophe, may break actually whoever. But for Ambient, I think we are probably safe.
Yeah, I agree. Like I have no issues with doing it for Ambient at all. It might be nice to do it for not Ambient because it makes things simpler, and it's actually quite complicated code.
It is complicated. Maybe
also,
rewriting the code a bit, because the use I had in mind for that at some point was for the egress discussion. I think there was a separate discussion in one of the backward chat about how to configure egress and using the network ranges, for example, with the public CIDRs to redirect traffic to an egress gateway. It's probably a very good use of that API.
So for users who are making use of this in sidecar mode, if we don't support it in ambient, that makes it difficult to migrate. Is that correct?
Keep in mind, ambient is also having a different multi-cluster model, and this kind of feature is mainly for multi-cluster and VMs was introduced. So if we have ambient, you have the waypoints, you have the different model. You have cluster local is local, so it's kind of a moot problem because in cluster local you don't really use the networks.
Yeah, like right now, you can't possibly use mesh networks with ambient today, anyways. Obviously, we're looking to add support, but I don't think it's expectation that I don't know. It could add some friction to someone, but to me, it's not necessarily a concerning friction. Like our expectation here is that very few people, if anyone, use it as well. So if we also formally deprecate it, it makes it a bit more clear message to users as well. Like, hey, you're using the deprecated thing, you're moving to the new thing, you have to migrate. So.
And the new thing is?
The new thing's a bit of a misnomer because it's like 5 years old at this point. But basically, and this is how 100% of the documentation on Istio works, is that you just label the Istio system namespace to declare what network that cluster is. And then that's discovered through all the other ones. So,
okay, as it connects to other clusters, it just reads what their network name is.
Yeah, technically it's slightly less powerful. Like I think in the mesh networks, you could say like these pod labels are in this network and these other ones are in this network, which you can't do. But you can also manually label a pod and say what network it's in, which is probably good enough, anyways. So there are technical differences. I just can't imagine there's actual real world differences to real users, at least for use cases I know about.
John, that's only for sidecar mode. I mean, for ambient, unless something changed, it's still the we need to go to the waypoint on the other cluster. So it's not really an issue of we no longer have flat network and concerns that we had with sidecars in ambient.
I mean, I'll say like the current design doc doesn't explicitly have flat network as a design goal. If somebody wants to come behind and add flat network semantics to reduce east-west gateway traversal, that certainly is likely a thing that we might tackle. But I still don't know that flat network. Yeah, flat network. You don't need mesh networks if you have a flat network. You're on a part of the same network anyway. So I don't know that that's a concern.
No, I mean, having direct traffic from a workload in one cluster to, well, actually that was also for the overlapping IPs for multi-network. I mean, there are some implications, but that mostly because of how sidecars work and the cluster local being global. With cluster local being local, I think we have plenty of ways to avoid this problem.
Gotcha.
All right, I think, sorry, go ahead.
I guess I have a orthogonal question about the original use case then of mesh networks. Kubernetes seems to require full connectivity within the scope of a cluster. So is there a scenario we had in mind where you might have a pod in a cluster that did not have full network connectivity to every other pod?
Sorry, it was a question for me?
I'm asking anyone. I'm just trying to understand the scenario that this feature was intended to support.
I think the original idea was, and folks who've been around longer than me, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that mesh networks is like a way to try to do multi-cluster routing without talking to remote API servers for at least some things, but then you lose certain things like service account and secure naming and things like that. So I don't know that that worked particularly well in the first place.
No, I don't think so. I mean, kind of. Like, you get party info without connecting, but it's not like there was ever an implementation that didn't connect, if that makes sense. Like, it's not like it was made to run in a degraded mode, right? It's just...
It was part of the mesh expansion and multi-cluster and multi-network thing. In particular for multi-network, that was where we needed, because and yes, it was for the cases where you cannot connect to the other network, because it was not, we at that point were supporting console and some other things where we didn't have an API server, so it was kind of a way to indicate that this workload is managed by something else. It's on a different network, so you cannot just connect directly. You need to use East-West gateway and a way to force traffic to a East-West gateway, basically. So if you don't know anything about it, go to the East-West gateway, which is what we are doing at Waypoint, by the way. I mean, it's a way to force traffic to some particular destination, but using the CIDR ranges instead of discovery. I don't know if that was clear.
Should we move to the service account now?
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thanks everyone. So last thing is back on the service account authorization policy API PR. It seemed like, I mean, we've gone through a lot of discussion. It seems like the core remaining piece, though, is the naming custom, that we don't like service account and would rather K8's service account.
I mean, the problem with service account, as I mentioned, is that it's as confusing as principal, where it's not really principal, it's just a mangled names that only Istio understand. The service account that we have there is not really a service account. I mean, service account, it's, it's like principal. It's a pretty broad concept. Google has service account, Microsoft, every vendor has service accounts and IDPs. And so that's why I don't like service account, and I prefer Kubernetes service account, that's what we mean. I think that is relatively easy to I don't think it's a huge deal to change from service account to Kubernetes service account. The format is the one that is more problematic, because, again, namespace / service account is another weird thing, just like the spiffy things that we introduced, which is not spiffy, it's Istio mangling of something. I don't know what it is. So my comment was that if we can confirm that we can adopt a format that Kubernetes is already using to represent a service account, like the one using JOTS or one of the things that they document, because they have 2 or 3 ways to represent service accounts as well, I'm happy. I mean, it's clear a service account. It's clear nobody will be confused who's using Kubernetes that we have to use something slightly different in Istio. Everything is good, and if network policy adopts that, even better. It's consistent. But if it's something that just Istio is going to do, I don't think it's a good idea. That's my concern. And of course, are we telling people to have reuse service accounts like in old Istio days, or are we telling people that you should version your service account, least privilege, and take into consideration? I mean, is it a best practice to use version service accounts, or is a corner case that only advanced users do it? I don't know that. That's I don't have enough. What I've seen is most people don't do the best thing, is the best practice, and I don't know. That's a different story. I can live without that, because it can be expressed in other ways.
Yeah, on the format, I guess I get what you're saying, but I have there's the JOT stuff with the K8's whatever format, but that's like an internal format that no normal user interacts with. So I don't I love the desire to not invent a new format. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think that those formats that are used in internal obscure APIs meet the use case we're targeting here, which is to meet the simplest user use cases. On the network policy side, they're way too far away to have a syntax. They probably won't have that for years. They've been moving quite slowly. I mean, technically, they haven't formally approved that they're even going to add it to the API, although it seems there's a lot of desire to do so. So I think if we're waiting for a format from them, we'll probably end up with a very long wait, unfortunately. I will say the namespace/name format is used throughout a lot of Istio. And I don't know, probably over half their APIs have a similar format, which I will accept that using Istio as prior art is not the best prior art when we're trying to go with standards, but it is at least not the first time it's used. The real alternative is a more structured field like a ref, which I had considered. We talked about it in another thing. I just worry it's so verbose and is so unaligned with what the rest of the authorization policy API is that it just felt very strange.
So a prefix is not such a big deal. I mean, having Kubernetes colon something at least allow us to extend it and do other things if we want to go that way. And then it's okay. I mean, that's or Istio colon. I don't know what to be the proper prefix.
The other thing too is that there can be multiple matchers, right? So we could have service account and then later introduce a new field, KNS service account, some other thing, like, or not even service account. Trust domain should probably be a matcher too. Like I'm saying that they're the properties that Istio cares about that the principal may encode. And we can add multiple we don't have to just like stick with one, right? Like I think we probably will add to the list either way. So like that's another way to do it versus getting bogged down in the format of this particular key.
But so to be clear, I mean, I have no problem if we add Kubernetes service account. My concern with the key was service account is a generic term and it's confusing to take over the word service account to mean Istio.
If we want to preemptively just name it KNS service account, I'm totally fine with that. Yeah.
Okay. And format of the value, it's confusing to users to if Istio is using one thing and Kubernetes is using the other thing. That's really the gist.
If Kubernetes settles on a standard format, which I don't think they have, then we can always do something else. But yeah,
Kubernetes has settled for years from the beginning on the format of the identity in the JOT tokens, the ones that we actually use to get the certificate. So that has not changed, and it probably will never change because of.
But do they? They don't expose that format in any APIs anywhere, or at least I've.
It is documented. It is in documentation. It is documented format.
But it's not something that you would write. You wouldn't write an API around that format, right? There's no Kubernetes API that expects you to plug in that format.
If you call, JOT tokens an API, or I don't know. That's a complicated story question.
I mean, NS/service account is a pretty common scoping for a lot. Like that's namespace scoping for Kubernetes resource is a pretty common with a slash separating is not super non-normative. Like a lot of stuff does that, but we can always change it if we have to.
Kubernetes is doing this. I mean, the Kubernetes core API. That's really, sorry. I see my hands.
I'm sympathetic to the making the common case simple, and I think the service account specification is the common case for most users, and so I'm on board with trying to not force those users to have to understand spiffy stuff. But where I get less, where I start getting a bit worried is we start talking about other matchers, because at that point now you're trading off. You're trading the complexity of like flags and levers in config versus the explicitness of a SAN. And I just don't know. I don't know how much complexity we're actually saving users if we move from a string that sure you have to understand the magical incantations of that string. But if we move from a string to a trust domain matcher that you also have to go and configure a mesh config, and then you've got to also, I guess you already have namespace, so that's there. But like if you start doing like in the federation use case, right? At some point we want to be able to federate multiple Istio meshes together. Now you've got to have multiple trust domains that configured in the alias. Does that map automatically to the SAN? How does that affect secure naming? And so, at least for me, I have this pretty simple mental model of the principal in obfusc policy equals the SAN that we're going to validate. And that's just like kind of for me an easy one-to-one mapping. Stuff like when you start adding abstractions like service account, I think that's probably fine. But other matchers and abstractions start making me a bit more concerned.
The problem is, though, that Istio does not care about the principal. It cares about certain things that may be encoded in the principal, such as service account, such as whatever. And one of the things like we have to be cognizant of is people may have principals in their systems today that contain more information than Istio cares about. So if we are exact matching on an exact kind of principal, that basically breaks them. So we have to pick something that can match a subset of a principal, basically. And I'm not saying that principal should be spiffy, or it could be X509 fields, it could be anything. I don't really care, but I'm saying like it has to support the case where there may be a principal that has more properties than we care to attest against in Istio.
But now we have to write config, have the user provide config about how to parse their principal.
Right, but I'm saying we don't have to do that, right? We could just support certain kinds of principles and saying, if we can support spiffy, we support spiffy principles, and your spiffy ID has to have at a minimum these properties, and those are the properties that you can attest against an off-call. That could be true for X509 certs. That could be true for any other kind of principal format you want to use. It changes it a little bit, but like I think that's like the API in my mind can't define a specific fixed principle no matter what. Like we have to come up with some way to like make it simpler in the off call. And I think service account is too simplistic in the long term, but it's like a start in that direction. So that's kind of why I would prefer to do something like that and see how it goes. Like I think there will be more, but I don't think it's going to get that big because Istio ultimately is going to care about three things, which is service account, namespace, trust domain. That's it. You may have a principal that encodes 10 other things, but we don't really care about that right now. And it doesn't look like we're going to ever care about those things. So, yeah.
Yeah, if I'm allowed to weigh in, I think I agree with some of the thoughts shared by Ben. I actually just did a check. Service account is just a Google thing. So as you keys it and Mitch in your cloud, I believe there's also a concept of service account. So I can see the points raised by Carsten by naming this service account could potentially generate some confusion if people are running in different cloud provider environment to compromise. Do you think it would be just reasonable we add something indicated it's Kubernetes service account in the PR so that it would be very clear to user, okay, for users who are already familiar with service accounts, all they need to specify is the existing Kubernetes service account without needing to understanding, the trust domain and everything the admin specify. I think it's a simplification to the user.
And I'm 100% for simplification. I mean, I think it's wonderful to simplify it. The question is how. And Nick comment in the mail, I think it's very, very important to internalize and to think about it, because users don't really think in terms of service account either. It's a simple thing is applications.
Actually, that's not true. When you are a developer who develop your app, you have to specify what is your service account your app is using, whether it's the default and whether it's a product page, right? So they know whoever writes the app or operate the service account, they understand the service account. They don't necessarily know the trust domain, which is set by the admin.
The trust domain for sure, but I'm saying that the service account is an internal thing that, most people use default, or they use some, version of the service accounts, or they use some random things that are not necessarily, full service account. Product page service account. It's really a product page. The application that is a source that they care about. Service or application.
Yeah, I get the point, and I actually agree with the point. I just don't think that we have a feasible means in Istio to author policies on higher level concepts than the core. Like in general, I think Istio consistently has been like the pretty much like the bottom of the abstraction for the most part, and like you could very clearly write an abstraction over authorization policy that targets your own concept of application. Tons of people do this. Often it's just something simple like Helm. Sometimes they write their own controllers and whatnot. But like the core primitive that is actually being authenticated is a service account. So if you go try and add a concept of like application, well, one, we don't have a concept of application in Istio at all. So we need to go like define a whole new concept. But two, it's also like eventually consistent now, right? So like we talked about Cilium, they have issues with identity being tied to IP address, which changes, right? Well, say we have application, now the application to service account mapping is eventually consistent as well. And what does that mean for security, right? It's much like, I don't think you're wrong that it would be a good user experience to write things at a much higher level. But I also don't think that it's necessarily, I don't know. I don't think it's practical or necessarily desired in Istio.
I mean, there is also the issue of symmetry, because the concept of secure naming, as flawed as it is in many ways, would be symmetrical with what Nick was putting in that message, basically, that the user care about, they are talking with a service, the source is another service. It's probably already identified, and if it's a service. So I don't know, it's worth considering those factors, and in particular, it's worth thinking about the multiple service account. I haven't heard any kind of your opinion about version service accounts, John, and I think that's kind of what I want to understand.
Yeah, I just don't care about them at all, basically. I've never, ever heard anyone briefly mention it until this PR where you mentioned it. So
in Istio, we had a long discussion about why we changed from a single service account in the common chart, and
Sure, I'm aware that we do it and that we're special or think we're special. I've never heard a user do it, and I've never heard a user say, I'm doing it and I need my policies to be higher level abstraction over that so I don't have to change them. I get what you're saying. Like it kind of makes sense. I just don't think it's a problem we need to solve. And
you remember why we did it? It was because in Helm is imposing this because it doesn't allow a chart to have service account. So we had to create a service account in a chart, and then the RBAC was messed up. So any advanced user and many users who use Helm charts will probably be exposed without knowing. I mean, they don't talk about it because they probably do it without knowing.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't know how they're doing it in general. I just know that I've never heard anyone ask about it. Whereas I've seen a lot of users, like we literally have had users spend multiple days stuck on trying to do the hello world of authentication in Istio because they don't understand this principal thing. So like we're getting it in all these weeds of all these complexity, but I don't know. I feel like we're losing sight of the goal, at least my goal, which is to make it so that I'm not embarrassed by step 2 of our hello world in terms of complexity.
Yeah. Again,
Carsten, does it make sense to maybe have the PR approved, and maybe you write a follow-up proposal on what you wanted to do? I'm just trying to separate, because it sounds like John are not interested in tackle the scenario you are going after.
So I'm okay to approve it if we change from service account to Kubernetes service account and confirm that the naming is, we're using something that people is not original, basically. That's using Kubernetes as well. That's okay. Not controversial. But what is controversial is, again, people don't talk about multiple service accounts because they do not know they are using it, probably. So we need to do some to verify some common applications that are deployed, or someone to do a survey to see if it's actually something people don't talk because they don't know they are doing it, or it's because they are not doing it.
I would point out, though, that managing service accounts in Kubernetes at scale is like a problem no matter what. That's not really ours to solve. Like it's not easy to solve at scale.
Yeah, I hate to disagree when you gave me a perfect opportunity to agree, but, and I think Keith said the same on the chat, I really do not like the idea of calling it Kubernetes service account. I think, one, you can't use K8 service account because using K8s is highly frowned upon in docs and APIs. I don't know who makes the rules, but that's what I've heard consistently, and we don't use it anywhere else. So it had to be Kubernetes service account, which is super mouthy and wordy and long to type. And these are Kubernetes APIs. Like, do we need this to specify? You're not wrong in theory. I just don't think from a practical standpoint, I feel like we're favoring absolute correctness over being pragmatic.
Can we compromise by making a comment and keep the service account name? So John is very clear. This is a Kubernetes service account in the comment that user will see.
I'm okay calling it service account if it has a prefix indicating it's Kubernetes, or any prefix that allows us to distinguish between, because it's an authentication policy, and Kubernetes is definitely not the only entity defining service accounts, and definitely not in this format only. There are multiple
But in
formats.
Istio, because Istio runs in Kubernetes, it implies, because one angle to think about this, Carsten, you as a cloud provider are making everybody else configuration more complex because they have to say Kubernetes service account, right?
How come we don't say Kubernetes namespace, HTTP method, spiffy principle? Every word in every single one of our APIs, literally every single one of them probably has 5 meanings. Every word is overloaded. You can make workflows for most APIs, but
John, Ingress, the API is not only for workload to workload. We also use the same API for Ingress. And on Ingress, again, it's you accept identities. I mean, MPLS on Ingress, it's supported and it's not guaranteed to be from a Istio client. It can be any browser or anything that is using any identity in any service account.
So if someone is trying to use a GCP service account for their authentication and they don't read the comment that says it's a Kubernetes service account, they'll try and put foo@googleim.com. Validation will reject it, say the namespace is expected to be namespace/Kubernetes service account. I just can't imagine a use case where someone, maybe they try once, but I can't imagine that they try once and then don't immediately get rejected by validation and then go read the comment or the error message and figure it out.
I don't know. I mean, value is non-standard. Key is basically confusing because, again, we are assuming, and it's as bad as the principal. I mean, the principal is also kind of, I don't know.
I mean, the value for server, I mean, it's fairly standard. Like if you look at cluster role, you're doing namespace/name. I mean, yeah, that's fine. Like everything in Kubernetes is written that way. I can do kubectl get namespace. Well, not through the flag, but and I've seen, I can't remember exactly where, but I've seen the namespace / format in places besides Istio. Like that feels fairly ubiquitous at this point.
So the standard for what we are matching against is either a JOT principal or a SAN. Kubernetes, I mean, I know there are many syntaxes used, but for identity purpose, the least confusing is the ones that Kubernetes is using. So I'm okay to call it service account if the value is whatever principal is used in Kubernetes. I mean, that's a very strict format and very clear format. Nobody will be confused.
I just realized about 10 minutes over time, but I think the last thing I'll ask is, I understand where the ambiguity comes in for like those of us who know about different formats and protocols and options, but to like the average user of Istio, are they even going to be aware of the options? And if they're not going to be aware of the options, why should we force that choice on them via an API? Why would we force that complexity on them?
Yeah, well said. Yes.
Will they be aware of the service accounts that are used underneath each particular applications they are calling? I mean,
of course they are. It's part of a Kubernetes YAML. They have to.
It's somewhere pretty deep in the Kubernetes YAML. They install Helm. They do Helm install foo. Do they know that foo is using XYZ service account and the version? Again,
they have to today because they have to put a spiffy principle in the policy anyway, which has that encoded. So it's the same.
I know, sure. Yeah. But if we have to simplify it, so what
I mean, this is a great simplification from spiffy principle today, right? Because spiffy asks 5 information. This is only asking you 1 information, and not everybody use cloud provider. Not everybody have service account confusing that may be provided by your cloud provider. To Keith's point, this is a great simplification already. Why would we ask people to pay for the complexity?
If it wasn't for the version service accounts, I wouldn't have a problem. The problem I have is and Nick comment actually that was the other things that kind of maybe, again, if everyone wants it, again, we have plenty of good APIs. It's not really a problem. Kubernetes will define some syntax for in network policy, and again, that's fine. I mean, it's not really that the APIs live forever, but I think it's really bad to not consider the virtual service accounts and to invent a new syntax just for Istio. Anyway, I mean, I'm not going to block it if everyone else wants to have it, but it feels like we are repeating exactly the same thing we did with the principal, where we invented our format and we kind of messed up the word principal.
All right, sounds like Carsten, you're okay, and Keith made a great comment too. If other people wants to add additional one, they can specify the additional one because Kubernetes is the default. And then John, if you can make the comment clear, I think that would probably PR would be good to go. We're 10 minutes over. Should we wrap this up and jump to the MBA meeting then? All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.